core associates for the TimberScan product. Mike's been in the construction industry for over 30 years. He's held a variety of positions, including software installations and implementations, managing a help desk for several years, consulting, and in the past 15 years, he's been involved with software sales. Mike also has a long history in the field of document imaging and workflow, and he has a lot of just unique experiences with software for construction companies. And he's been with TimberScan since, I believe, 2007. Mike, you there?
I am, yes.
Right,
thank you very much, Tim.
Go and take on over.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it, and thank you to everyone at Alliance for coordinating this. Again, we greatly appreciate it. So let's get started. Basically, what we're going to do today is we're going to start with a brief PowerPoint slideshow, not many slides, but just to kind of define TimberScan in a little bit more detail. And then what we'll do is we will break out of the PowerPoint and we'll get right into the product. And we're going to spend the better part of the hour in the product. There's a lot to cover, and so I'm really going to kind of push hard here to make sure that we get everything covered within the hour. But we would certainly appreciate it if you have the time. Once we're finished, if you want to ask any questions or what have you, I'll be more than happy to answer any of those questions. So with that, let's kick things off here. First of all, defining TimberScan. TimberScan is an enterprise content management system that is designed to allow you to create a completely paperless office. And there are three major components of TimberScan. Now, some of you who may be somewhat familiar with TimberScan might be familiar with the fact that TimberScan actually started as an AP routing and approval system. That's really where TimberScan was designed initially, and that's where we're going to spend the initial part of today's presentation, is talking about that, managing AP invoices and that process that takes place when the invoices come in, when they get routed, and what happens from there. There are two other major components of TimberScan, however. One of them is called TimberScan Capture. What Capture does is it allows you to use optical character recognition to extract invoice information from an accounts payable vendor's invoice and populate the invoice entry screen. So we're going to kind of touch on that. I'll show you an example of how that works, and we'll kind of go through that in somewhat briefly. The other aspect to TimberScan is called Advanced Image Management, or AIM. So what AIM does is it allows you to manage all of your documents from within your organization. It goes beyond the AP invoices to other documents such as project management, property management, human resources, whatever it is. So basically, the reason why TimberScan is defined as an enterprise content management system is because it allows you to take all of your documents, all correspondence within your organization, and create a central repository where you're able to go and manage all of those documents from one place. TimberScan was developed initially in 2004. And today we have over 20,000 users and over 1,000 companies that are using the product. All of those companies are Sage 300 users, by the way. This next slide is a workflow depiction of what typically takes place within TimberScan as invoices are received. So again, we're going to focus on the AP invoice routing and approval process first. Basically, what I find in many cases when I talk with a company one-on-one is the first thing I will do is I'll ask them, well, what is the normal procedure that takes place when you receive an invoice? And for the most part, what I hear, it's pretty much kind of a common refrain. It's that invoices come in, and we send those invoices off at some point to an approver, and in many cases it's done manually. We never know when we're going to get the invoice back, but once it does finally come back, if we've missed discounts and what have you and due dates, we still have to go through and key that invoice into Timberline and then process and cut the checks against it. So what happens in TimberScan is this. As we receive invoices, regardless of how we receive them, starting with step one, we get the invoices into the system. So now you have early and instant visibility. You know from the beginning, from day one when that invoice arrives, what the status of the invoice is. Then what we do is we send it off in step 2 to what we call initial coding. This is basically where accounts payable will pick the invoice up, and they will start the AP invoice entry process here in TimberScan. What we've done is we've extracted all of the AP invoice entry functionality that currently exists in Timberline, and it's available to us in TimberScan with a number of other features built around it. So we're going to start the AP invoice entry process here, send it off to the approvers within TimberScan, and then as the approvers go through, they approve the invoices in TimberScan. It comes back in TimberScan to an area we call final review. Final review is basically an area where, in essence, where accounting has one last opportunity, if you will, to be able to look at those invoices, review them, check the way that they were coded, and then we pass them seamlessly into Sage 300, where they get posted and we can cut checks against them. So we're going to focus the initial part of our presentation today on these 5 steps, starting with getting the invoices in and working our way through the process. But before we do that, just a couple of other items to cover that will kind of set up the conversation as we get into the system. TimberScan allows you to automatically route invoices to the right approver based on your business rules. So what we do when we implement TimberScan at your office, the first thing that we do is we go through what I call a tailoring procedure. And with that tailoring process, what we're doing is we are tailoring TimberScan to meet your business needs. And part of that tailoring process is setting up what we call business rules. So the business rules will allow us to be able to automatically, as we're processing the invoices, send it off to the right approvers. Could be project managers on a job, property managers, for example. You may have multiple approvers. All of those things are possible. So we set that tailoring process and business rules up first, and it just makes the process of entering and sending those invoices off to the approvers very simple, very straightforward, and it becomes more of an automated process. We support multiple approvers, as I mentioned, and you can establish things like dollar thresholds. Invoices greater than a certain dollar amount can be escalated up to another level of approval. Lots of flexibility there. We process invoices in TimberScan in a batch, and at the conclusion of the batch, what we do is we send an email notification to the approvers letting them know that they have invoices to approve. At that point, they would log into TimberScan and go through the approval process. As I mentioned before, the data entry or invoice entry grid that's designed in TimberScan was laid out to function exactly the same as it does in Timberline. It has all the same lookups, the same warnings, same error messages, and distribution grids. So it's basically, you're not having to learn a new AP invoice entry system when you're using TimberScan. You're working with the same functionality that you currently work with in Timberline today. The difference, however, is we've built a lot of other features, including the image itself, so that you have the image right in front of you to be able to process with. We have a number of reports which I'll touch on throughout the application, and those reports allow you to pull information from both 300 of Timberline and TimberScan and meld that information together. So as you're looking at information, you're able to see both sides, what's been posted in Timberline, for example, and what's currently in the routing and approval process in TimberScan. We also have dashboard capability, which I'll spend a couple minutes showing you a couple of examples of how you can utilize the dashboards. Now, I mentioned that there were 3 major components, the second being TimberScan Capture. TimberScan Capture is an add-on to the base AP routing and approval system. It's optional. You don't have to acquire this and implement this if you don't want, but if you do, what TimberScan Capture allows you to do is to use optical character recognition to take your vendor invoices and create a template. And from that template, what you're able to do is define certain elements of that particular invoice, such as the vendor number, the date, amount, and other things such as that it will then retrieve automatically at the point of invoice entry, and it populates the invoice entry grid. So it can dramatically speed and reduce the entry time that it takes to process AP invoices. And then in some cases, you may never touch the keyboard, and you can just accept the invoices and send them off. So we will spend a little bit of time touching on Capture and how this product works and how it can be melded into your process of AP invoice routing and approval. The other major component to TimberScan is AIM, Advanced Image Management. This, again, gives you the ability to establish a central repository for all of your documents and correspondence. Instead of having to search through filing cabinets or the Windows file system, you can take documents and save them in AIM and define them by document type and index for easy retrieval. And you can save those documents in their native format. So you can save Word documents, Excel, PDF, anything that you want to be able to save, and then link them to records inside Sage 300. So for example, if I'm in, for example, the job file, and I want to be able to go in and click on the attachment button in the job file and call up all of the documents that I've saved in AIM, I'm able to do that. You can create, as I mentioned, user-defined document types, document categories, and indexes. You can establish security and restrict access to sensitive documents. You can also set up workflows. So in the same way that you can route AP invoices around for approval, you can route additional or other documents within your own same way. You can route them around and people can review and approve them or reject them, if you will. So in essence, that workflow can be created for any document, not just AP invoices. Flexible searches that you can save for future reporting. Again, linking those documents to Sage 300. And then the ability to retrieve, view, print, email, whatever you need to do with a particular document or series of documents. Now, in addition, one other item, supporting documents. So if you typically attach, let's say, a purchase order, a receiving ticket, or something else to an invoice today, you can attach those same supporting documents to an invoice in TimberScan electronically. And you can attach checks. So what we'll do toward the end of the AP routing and approval process is we'll talk about how you can attach checks, and then you can see all of that information compiled together, not only in TimberScan, but also in Sage 300. Okay, so back to the screen one last time, and it's really just for a point of emphasis to mention that, again, this is where we're going to start. We're going to go through the process of talking about what happens when we acquire invoices initially, off for initial coding, off to the approvers, back through final review, and then post it in Sage 300, where we can cut checks against them. But this same workflow process can work not only for AP invoices, but for any of your documents. So think about any document that you might send around in your organization for approval, a contract, a change order, something else that you might want to be able to route around for approval. We can design the same workflow concept here for any document. And with that, let's break out of the PowerPoint slide and we'll go in and kind of walk through the product. So to log into TimberScan, what you would do is select an icon on your desktop like this, and it takes us through our security credentials to a screen that looks like this. So this is basically the TimberScan master menu, where what I have are a series of functions or modules here across the top. Select any of these. What it does is it brings up a series of apps that are related to that particular function or module. And then I can select any of these apps and it works further into the system. So as far as navigation, working my way through the system, TimberScan is a very user-friendly application. It's very easy to learn how to just adapt to be able to get in here and kind of navigate my way around. So where we're going to start is at the point in time where invoices arrive at your door. And when that happens, what we do to get those invoices into TimberScan initially is we choose the acquire function, and then we choose the option acquire images, and it opens up our viewer. So let's take a couple of scenarios here. Let's say that you received an invoice from a vendor or subcontractor, for example, by email. What you can do is you can go right to Outlook. You can take the attachment from Outlook, drag and drop it right here to the viewer, and open it here. And if that attachment has multiple pages, you can determine how you want to go about splitting. So you can manually separate them, or you can let the system automatically split them for you, because perhaps they may have sent you more than one invoice. But we're going to manually split these, and when I hit OK, what it does is it just calls up those particular documents that I dragged and dropped into the viewer. Now, if I want to look at this more closely, a couple of things I can do. I can use the zoom in or zoom out features here at the bottom of the screen. Or the easiest thing for me to do is just use the wheel of my mouse like I'm doing now, and I can just size this as large or small as I need to on the screen. And I can scroll up and down to see it further if I need to. Now, in addition to being able to size it or zoom in, what you can also do is you can use these control buttons on the right-hand side. So if perhaps I needed to remove borders or hole punches, or I needed to deskew or despeckle the document, maybe it came in upside down and I need to rotate it, or I want to put highlights or sticky notes or annotations on the document, all of those things are available to you here. So regardless of where I go throughout the entire application, you're always going to have the ability to size the document with the wheel of your mouse or use the zoom in and zoom out features, and you'll always have these control buttons available to you here. So now as I look at this first page, this first invoice is invoice 393. If I come over here to the thumbnail view and I look at the second page, this is a second invoice. So to split this batch, it's very simple. You just come to the top of the screen, select this option called Mark as New Invoice, and it splits it right there. So now this is invoice 1 and this is invoice 2. And you can do this with a whole series of pages. You can just scroll down, find where you need to create the break, and you just hit Mark as New Invoice and it creates the break right there. So drag and drop from an email is really very straightforward, and you just drag that particular attachment right here. Now, if you receive your invoices in the mail, what you can do is you can take the invoice, you can put it onto your scanning device, and then right here where it says image source, TimberScan allows me to identify that particular scanner, and when I click this little scan button, it will actually start the scanner. It will scan those particular invoices and it will drop them into the viewer this way. The other option is that you could, if you decided rather than having to scan and acquire them all in one step, you can designate a file on your server as your AP invoice file. Then here at image source, what you can do is just identify that file, and all you need to do at that point is just go out, open the file. You can sweep through the file, grab the invoices and the documents that you need, hit open, and they drop into the viewer the same way. And again, we go through the splitting process there. So getting them into the system, regardless of whether they're emailed, they come in the mail, whether you want to pull them in from a file, everything starts here. Then what we do is we identify the type of image that it is. In this case, these are considered regular invoices. But we have a number of choices, including checks, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and supporting documents. So if I had a purchase order, receiving ticket, or something else that I wanted to attach to an invoice, what I can do is I can just acquire those the same way that I did this invoice image, identify it as a supporting document, and then I just go ahead and index it to its appropriate vendor, job, whatever, and it's available to me when I need it. So these are regular invoices. Next step is where I'm going to assign the invoices. Now again, the way that TimberScan conceptually works is that what we do is we take the invoices once they're acquired and we send them for initial coding. So we're sending them to accounts payable, and we're going to start the AP invoice entry process in TimberScan. So where it says data entry group here, this is our accounts payable person or accounts payable group that we want to be able to assign these invoices to. And then when we hit process, they'll come out of the viewer and they'll be assigned and queued up for this person or this group to pick them up and start processing the invoices. So we're not sending them to the approvers yet. We're sending them to accounts payable. So this could be where it says main data entry. That's my group that I want to be able to assign these to. You can have multiple people, multiple groups here. It doesn't matter. And you can just take the invoices, assign them accordingly, and hit process, and off they go. That's the acquisition of the invoices initially. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to go to invoice entry, and now when I logged in, what the system is telling me is that so I'm just going to go ahead and call these up, and I'm going to call up the first invoice in that batch of 50, and it's an invoice for Wombats Plumbing. So this is basically the AP invoice entry screen, where what you have is you have the invoice image here in the upper part of the window, which again, I'm using the wheel of my mouse to size it, and I've got these control buttons over here. And down toward the bottom part of the screen, I have the AP invoice entry grid, and I have these control buttons across the bottom and top, which we're going to touch on several of these as we go through the process. Now, one thing you'll notice here is I start making this image larger and larger on the screen. It starts getting cut off by the data entry grid down here at the bottom. But what you can do is if you have dual screens or wide screens or you want to tile the screens, you can just take this data entry grid and you can move it. So I can slide this over to the other side of the screen or to a second screen. That way I've got the invoice image in full view on one side, and I can take this data entry grid and I can just make this as large or small as I need to on the other. The other point about the invoice entry grid is that it is designed and laid out to function exactly like it does in Sage 300. It's following all the same rules, all the same conventions, so it's not like you're having to learn a brand new AP invoice entry system. You're basically working with the same invoice entry functionality in TimberScan as you do in Timberline. We start with vendor code. If I don't happen to know the vendor code for Wombat's Plumbing, I can either use a function key like function key F4 to call up a list, or I can just choose from this list option here at the bottom of the screen, and it calls up my list of vendors directly out of the Timberline vendor master file. So this is a live look into Sage 300 Timberline. It's going into the vendor file and it's calling up my list of vendors. And I have the opportunity to sort by vendor number, name, or address. Or if I want to just put in key letters, for example, it just goes and searches and finds Wombat's Plumbing, and I plug it in. Plug in the invoice number. If it's a duplicate invoice, which this one is, it's going to stop me. So what it's doing at this point is it's going out and it's searching both the Timberline and the TimberScan database simultaneously. And it's looking to see, is there another invoice somewhere, either in Timberline or in TimberScan, invoice 12044, and it found one. So it's not going to let me to process this invoice this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to append this. But I'll show you in a couple of moments how quickly we can go find and isolate that duplicate invoice and call it up on the screen. For now, what we'll do is we're just going to go ahead and we're going to process here, put in the invoice amount, and we're going to work our way down to the distribution grid. Now, I know we have several companies that are represented and attending today's presentation. So I just want to make a point at this point. Basically what I did when I logged into TimberScan, I had the choice of what company and what database I wanted to go into. And what I did is I chose a construction database. So basically what it did is it brought me up to the construction information, commitment, job, cost code, what have you. I could have just as easily gone into a property management database where it would have brought up property, unit, GL account code, whatever. So I emphasize here that TimberScan is not just for construction companies. It is for both construction and for real estate management. So regardless of which type of operation you are, the TimberScan will work equally well for both. And we have many, many clients that are using either one or the other, or in some cases both. So we're going to start by processing this invoice against a commitment, and then we're going to back up and we're going to see what happens without a commitment. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to go out and I'm going to select from the list. It's going to go into the job cost system in Timberline, and it's going to call up my commitments for me. I'm going to take this third commitment, and as soon as I call up that commitment, the first thing the TimberScan does is it goes out and it searches, and it's going to find any compliance issues related to this vendor based on this commitment, and it calls it right up here on the screen. This way, if I need to take immediate action, I can do so. So throughout the entire process, what TimberScan does is it's doing a check and balance. It's going out and it's looking and it's finding these compliance issues. And if there is something that's out of whack, that's out of compliance, for example, it's going to call it up and call our attention to it right here. I'm just going to say OK here so we can continue on. And now what TimberScan does at this point is it went through and it populated the rest of the distribution grid. Now it did so in this case because this happened to be a single line commitment. So it plugged in the job, the cost coding category. Had this been a multi-line commitment, what would happen is it would bring up the distribution grid toward the top of the screen, and I could just go down through the various line items and match up the commitment lines against the invoice lines. Now, the other thing that happens is that it provides me with this summary here on the right-hand side. So as I'm going through and processing each line item of this particular invoice against the commitment, it's keeping track what's going on, the committed amount, what's being invoiced, what the balance is, and so forth. If the balance goes negative, it's going to highlight that for me right here on the screen. So I can see that I've overcommitted on that particular line item for this invoice and allow me to take corrective action immediately. In addition to the information that's available here in the summary, I can also hover the mouse on these fields and it will call up a tooltip with additional information. So for example, if I wanted to hover the mouse on the commitment field, I can see the original committed amount plus any change orders, what's been paid, what's being invoiced. If I hover the mouse on the job, I can see the revised contract amount of the job, what's been billed, and the balance. And if I hover the mouse on the cost code, I can see what's been invoiced against this cost code. So one of the nice things is that I don't have to go out and have, for example, Sage 300 open and run any kind of a special job cost report to be able to make some comparisons or look and see what's going on here. I have this information right here at my tool, right here on these tooltips, right at my fingertips. Now, if I needed further detail, I can also click on this job option here, and it's going to bring up an entire spreadsheet of information related to this particular job and all the invoices related to it. So you can see as much detail as you need right here, and you can see summaries here in the tooltips, and it allows you to just continue to process without having to go out and look anywhere else. Now, if I'm finished at this point, what I can do is just accept the invoice, and TimberScan will send it off to the approvers, again, based on our business rules. So the business rules are set up behind the scenes as we're tailoring the system initially, and then I can just accept the invoice. It sends it off to the approvers. They pick it up, and they go through, and they review and approve the invoice from there. So that's processing an invoice against a commitment. If we back up for just a moment, take a couple of other scenarios here. Let's say that we're processing an invoice and we don't have a commitment. What we can do in that case is I can just go ahead and plug in the job, for example. Let's say I want to charge it to job 03001. Now, the beauty of TimberScan is this. I don't have to complete all of the coding here in invoice entry before I can accept the invoice and send it off to the approvers. So I can send this off just like it is, and TimberScan will pick this up. That will say who the approvers are based on, let's say, for example, the job. I accept it, off it goes, and then the approvers can pick it up, and they can go through and do the rest of the coding. So you don't have to have something filled in here in order to get this sent off. I can leave it just like this, send it off, and let the coding take place on the approval end. Now, other things that you're able to do here. You can do joint checks if you have joint payees right here. If I have any supporting documents, what I can do is click on the Supporting Documents tab, and it will call them up here on the screen. Now, the supporting documents that it's calling up are supporting documents that have been indexed to, in this case, Wombat's Plumbing, or perhaps to job 03001. So it goes through and it kind of it streamlines them out and only brings up the ones that are related to, for example, this vendor or this job. And I can just go ahead and select whatever it is that I want to call up, and then I can just attach it, and it will attach to that particular invoice. And it will stay with that invoice from that point on. Now, let's say that I have a document that has been, it's sitting on my desktop, and I haven't been able to go through and acquire it as a supporting document. You can still take that document, and you can just drag and drop it to the screen, and you can attach it right here. So you don't necessarily have to have documents sitting in the supporting documents queue in order to be able to attach them from your desktop, for example, and attach it that way. Other things that we can do. The history option. So when we keyed in this invoice initially, if you recall, it told me that it was a duplicate invoice. So what I can do is, if I click on the history button, it calls up a report that is laid out like an Excel spreadsheet. And what this is showing me is this is every invoice in the system related to Wombat's Plumbing, regardless of its status. So there could be some invoices that we've already posted in Timberline and we've cut checks against them. and we could have other invoices that are somewhere in the routing and approval process in TimberScan. It pulls all of that information together in one report, and because it's laid out like an Excel spreadsheet, it can actually function just like Excel. So if I wanted to be able to sort, or I wanted to be able to sum or what have you, I can do that. Or I can export this to Excel if I want to, or I can print it. But the other thing that I can do, if I'm isolating, I'm looking for that duplicate invoice, that invoice 12044. So here it is. I can see when it was invoiced, what the accounting date is, what the payment date was. I can see the details of how it was coded. But I can also call up that original invoice document on the screen. And when I do this, what I'm also able to do is call up our approval page. So the approval page is something that's built behind the scenes automatically every time you acquire an invoice into TimberScan. At that point, it starts building this approval page with all the various iterations. So in this case, it's showing me when the invoice was received and by whom, who entered it and when, who has approved it so far, and where does it stand. So if Wombat's, Wombat's Plumbing was 12044, this is one of several places that I can go and I can see what the status of that invoice is. Now, other things that we're able to do in invoice entry. I can create an email right here and send that email out through Outlook. So maybe there's something that I wanted to alert someone or email someone regarding Wombat's Plumbing or this invoice. I can just click on the email button and I can send out the email through Outlook, and I can optionally attach this invoice as a PDF attachment if I want to. I can, as I mentioned, put highlights or sticky notes or annotations on the invoice. But if I don't want to clutter up the document, what I can also do is just create these comments. The comments are internal to TimberScan. So then anytime anyone opens up this invoice in TimberScan, they can see the comments. They'll pop up. So I don't have to clutter up the document with all kinds of sticky notes and what have you. I can just put the comments in, and they'll appear as someone opens the invoice. Now that's basically it for the invoice entry process. Just a couple of other items here. I've talked about the business rules and how they work, but you can also have some flexibility here. So let's say I have a scenario where I have nothing. I have no commitment, no job, no cost code, nothing here. If I accept the invoice, what it will do is it will pop up a list of my approvers, and then I can decide where I want to route it from here. So the business rules will primarily dictate where the invoices get routed, but you have the flexibility of being able to route for some specific purpose if you need to. You can also do things like this. Invoice doesn't need to be job charged. This is going to be a direct GL expense account charge. So it doesn't need to go off to an approver. You can do things like auto-approve invoices right here. And they get auto-approved, and they can be sent directly on to Sage 300 for posting at that point. So that's it for invoice entry at this point. We're going to back out of here, and I'm going to log in as an approver. We'll go through the approval process. But just before we do that, what I'm going to do is kind of sidetrack for a moment, and we're going to talk about TimberScan Capture. As I mentioned, Capture is an optional module that you can also add to TimberScan AP invoice routing and approval if you so choose. What Capture does is it allows you to take a vendor's invoice and it allows you to create a template for that invoice. Basically what I've done is I've gone through and I've acquired some vendor invoices and I've created some templates already. So I'm just going to show an example of how this works. I'm going to take this particular vendor's template and call it up here on the screen. What I did is I acquired their invoice initially, and I dropped it in here to this template viewer. So I took their vendor invoice, it's here in the template viewer, and now I have this menu-driven program that allows me to go through and select and isolate certain criteria on this particular document that I want to retrieve automatically. It starts with anchors. The anchors are the places on this invoice that I would go through and select that allow me to identify this as a Beaverton Sand and Gravel invoice. So perhaps I might highlight their vendor name, their address and phone number here. And then every time I receive an invoice from this vendor, it looks at the anchor first. And once it recognizes this, then it moves on and starts recognizing, looking for other information on this document. Identifiers can be used a couple of different ways. Let's say I have multiple locations for Beaverton Sand and Gravel. I don't want to have to go out because their vendor invoices are the same, but I want to be able to create separate profiles for different locations. I can use one template and create separate profiles by identifier specified, in a certain location that tells me, this is for their, address at whatever location, and then have another identifier for the same template for a different location. Or for property managers, in the case where you might have an invoice, let's say an invoice where you've got to split across multiple units. So maybe you've got a utility bill that you need to split. You need to spread it across multiple units. You can set up one template for that utility bill, and you can create multiple identifiers and specify what part of that you want to attach to what unit. Then we go to invoice number. What I did is I took the blue highlighter, I just moved it here to the invoice number field. You can size this box, as you can see, as large or as small as you need to. This system will ask you where do you want to read the information from in the box, and then it will just read it back to you and tell you what the result looks like. So in this case, what I did is I made this box large enough so that it will accommodate as their invoice number grows, it will still fit in the box. Did the same thing with invoice date. I took the gray highlighter and placed it here. Balance due, placed it down here and sized it. Description is here. And now there's other information that you can apply here as well if they put your job number or commitment number on your document. Or what you're also able to do is with every template, you can select this option called invoice coding. What that does is that allows me to provide additional information that I want to be able to save with this template. It's not information that I'm going to retrieve from the document itself, but it's information that I want to save with the template so that it's basically like creating defaults. So whenever I process an invoice for Beaverton Sand and Gravel, I want the system to charge it to this particular vendor code because that's my vendor code for Beaverton Sand and Gravel. Or maybe I've got a default job or cost code or piece of equipment or GL account that I want to be able to automatically charge. I can set up this, and then it resides with that template. Then what happens is once this is set up, we go out, we acquire the invoices the same way that we normally do. There's a template set up. If it recognizes the template, it drops it right here to invoice entry, and it looks like this. So it took that Beaverton Sand and Gravel invoice. It's all color-coded just like it was when I set it up initially. And it takes this information and it pulls it right into the invoice entry screen for me automatically. So I didn't have to touch the keyboard. All of this is already pulled in. Hypothetically, if you've got your invoice coding set up where I've defaulted a default job, cost code, or piece of equipment or commitment or whatever it is, all of this could potentially be filled in. I never have to touch the keyboard. I just hit accept and off it goes. So that's how quickly you can streamline the process. You set up the templates first, and then it just pulls the information in. And it's all color-coded, so I can just quickly match it up by color code and see and make sure everything looks okay. And it also allows you, it's not like you're restricting anything here. So if there's something that I need to override, I can still do that. It's just going to pull in the information that I specified that I wanted to retrieve. So that's an overview of the TimberScan capture module. Let's break out of here, and now what I'm going to do is log in as an approver, and we'll go into the approval process and approve an invoice. Plug in my credentials here, and I log in to approve an invoice. I'm going to go to the approval screen, and what TimberScan is telling me is that I have 12 invoices that are currently queued up waiting for me to approve. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to call them up, and you can isolate. So if I say, well, I want to just call up invoices for a specific job or specific vendor or by specific discount date, for example, you can go ahead and do that. If you say all invoices, it's just going to call up the first invoice in that group of 12. And in this case, it happens to be an invoice for Wombats Plumbing. So you notice the first thing that happens is that I get this compliance issue that pops up as a warning on the screen on the approval screen. So what happens in TimberScan is that as you're sending invoices to approvers, if there are any compliance issues or if there are any comments that anyone has placed on this invoice, they're going to pop up first so that I'm going to see this. So it's not, as an approver, I can't say, well, I never saw that. I didn't realize. This information is going to be right here in front of you. So basically, I'm just going to say OK, and we're going to continue on. And now we'll play out a few scenarios. Let's say what I want to do is I'm just going to put a sticky note on this invoice, and I'm just going to say that we can't process this invoice due to the workers' comp issue, for example. And as an approver, I'm just going to go ahead and email it. And I'll email this back to Wombats Plumbing, and maybe I'll copy someone else internally here. And I can even optionally include the invoice as a PDF attachment. I hit send, out through Outlook it goes, and it sends it off to whomever it is that I want to send it to. So that's one option. I can put the invoice on hold, or I can reject the invoice. But if I do either of these two things, TimberScan will force me to put a reason in as to why I'm either placing it on hold or why I'm rejecting it. That way, anyone else that comes in, if they want to look at the status of this invoice, they can see why has the invoice been placed on hold or why has it been rejected. The other thing that you can do when you reject an invoice, if you have multiple approvers, let's say, for example, I'm the third person that's approving this invoice. 2 people prior to me have already approved it, and it's come to me. I look at it, and I want to reject it. But I don't want to necessarily reject it and send it all the way back to where it originated, back in accounting, and have to start the whole process over again. I just want to reject it back to the previous person, for example. So I can put a reason in, and I can determine how far back I want to reject an invoice. Now, this invoice came to me, and it's not coded. So I'm going to go ahead, and code this. So as an approver, I have the option to be able to code invoices and process from here. Now, let me just stop for a second, because this question comes up frequently. You can set up the system, and you can establish security for each approver and determine whether or not you want to give access to this. So some people might say, yes, I want the approvers to be allowed to go through and code themselves. You can have other scenarios where you say, well, we have some approvers that we don't want them to have to touch this. We don't want them to do anything here. We don't want them making any modifications. So you can set the security at different levels where either they have access to be able to go in and code and they can't get out of the screen until they've finished, for example, or maybe they don't have access to be able to do any coding. They can just go through and approve. Now, let's say everything on this invoice looks fine as far as dollar amounts and what have you. I'm ready to approve the invoice, but I don't want us to cut a check to Wombats Plumbing until they resolve that compliance issue. So what you can do is you can select this option here called Hold in AP. What this will do is this will activate the hold condition in Timberline. So even though I'm going to go ahead and approve the invoice, and it's going to pass through final review, and it's going to get posted in Timberline, we are not going to be able to cut a check against it until someone satisfies that hold condition. So it puts it on hold for payment and allows for someone to then actively go through and take that off of hold whenever you're ready to pay it. Okay, so basically that's kind of a brief overview of the approval process. Now, a couple of other options and a couple of other things that you're able to do. First of all, just like we were able to in invoice entry, I can hover the mouse on these fields and I can call up these tooltips and I can see information related to the cost code and to the job, for example. Now, let's say that I wanted to see some additional information on this particular job, for example. What I can do is I can choose this job option, and it will bring up a report that's laid out like an Excel spreadsheet. But there's another advantage to this particular job report, which there's actually a separate report in the system that you can run where you can select numbers, jobs and date ranges or what have you. But since we're focused on this job 03001 in the approval screen, I'm going to call up all of the invoices for this particular job. Now, one of the beauties of the system is that if you have any scenario where you need to provide backup on a time and material or cost plus billing, where you've got to do a roll-up, you've got to provide all of the invoices related to that time and material or cost plus billing. What you can do in TimberScan is we've basically built all of that for you. So when I click on this job option, it calls up this, what looks like an Excel spreadsheet. It is all of the invoices for job 03001 with lots of detail here. And it shows me the invoice, it shows me the amounts, and as I kind of scroll across the screen here, I've got the commitments, if there are any, the job, of course, the cost codes, all of this information. And as I get all the way over here to the right-hand side, I also have the invoice images. So if I have to provide backup for a T&M or cost plus billing and compile all of those invoices as backup for that particular T&M or cost plus bill, what I'm able to do is generate a report right from here and say that I want to combine the invoice images with the report. If I do that, what the system will do is it will generate a report that looks like this. And it shows me the job, it shows me the cost codes that were being charged, and as I scroll down through the pages here, I also have the invoice images attached. So that process, which I've seen in many companies, is a very manual and laborious process to go through and compile all that backup, is already built for you in TimberScan. And I've also seen where, in many cases, someone has to manually go through and track that and do a manual spreadsheet to keep track of this information. TimberScan has built this for you automatically. Now, one other point with regard to the approvals. When I came into the approval screen, what I did is I just called up this first invoice, went through the full edit mode, and I was approving it this way. What you can also do is you can call up invoices in this dashboard view. Now with the dashboard, what it allows me to do is I can see things in these various graphical quadrants. So rather than have to thumb through each of the invoices individually, what I can do is I can see more of a snapshot here. So now if I'm looking at by vendor, by payment date, what have you, maybe I just want to isolate my invoices that are still within the discount period. Or I want to look at my invoices for a specific job, the Northwest Food Warehouse job. So if I hover the mouse on here, it will show me here are the number of invoices and basically the amount of payables that we have that are waiting for my approval for the Northwest Food Warehouse job. Now what I can do is I can just select this, and it either calls them up in card view like this, or I can call them up in grid view, which is laid out like an Excel spreadsheet. From here, hypothetically, if I have enough information right here on the screen, I could just go through and approve the invoices this way. Or if I need to edit any of these and call it up in more detail, I can just call it up this way, and I can go through and code and approve it like this. So it gives you that flexibility of being able to see things in more of a kind of a streamlined overview, and then I can just drill in and I can go from there further in. Okay, so once the invoices get through the approval process, where they end up is back here in Final Review. Now in Final Review, you can either call up the invoices individually and you can look at them and see how everything was coded, or Final Review also has a dashboard view. So in here, I can go in and I can see things in various quadrants. And then what I'm able to do is I can isolate, and I could say maybe I just want to look at the Baldwin Painting invoices, call them up either in card view or grid view, and then if I need more details, I can see them this way, or I can see the comments that anyone has placed on these invoices. So I've got all of this flexibility here. Once the invoices go through Final Review, they get passed to Timberline, and then the invoices can be posted in Timberline. Now, once the invoices are posted in Timberline and we're able to cut checks against them, what we can do in TimberScan is we can take the checks and we can match the check images up to the invoice images. So regardless of whether you're printing them out on check stock or whether you're using an automated program like, say, Puricle's Create a Check or PrintBoss, for example, you can get those invoice images into TimberScan, take this checks program, and then you're able to go through, identify the batch that you created over in Sage 300 to create those checks, and then you can just call up the check images on the screen, and then the system will ripple through each check, and it will attach each check image to each invoice image. So in this case, this Baldwin painting check 12,595 is attaching to these two invoice images. Then, if I want, not only can I see this information in TimberScan, but I can also come over here, go to job costs, for example, go to general ledger, drill down to the invoice detail level, or I can, let's say, go into accounts payable in Sage 300, and I can look at my AP transactions, scroll down Baldwin painting, call up invoice 123. I'm going to click on the paperclip attachment that's highlighted. What it does is it opens up our viewer. From here, I can see the invoice itself. I can see our approval page, which we talked about earlier. I can see any supporting documents, in this case a purchase order, and I can see that check, 12,595. So it took all of this information, compiled it together, and it's available to me not only in TimberScan, but it's also available to me in Sage 300. Now, a couple of other items here. Back in TimberScan, the other thing that you can also do with checks is that in many organizations, what I found is that the check signer or the check approver wants all of the backup. They want all of the invoices and any of the supporting documents with the check so that they can go through and approve the checks or sign the checks. In TimberScan, we've compiled all that electronically. So hypothetically, what I could do is I could take a stack of checks and just the checks only, and I could just go in here and say, okay, let me take with a bank account, and I'll just, put in the first check that I have in the stack here, and it goes through and it calls up information related to the check, shows me the invoices that it's paying and the images of the invoices and all the supporting documents here, how those invoices were coded, and who the approvers are down here. So I've got all of this information right here in front of me on the screen, and I could hypothetically just scroll through to the next check and the next check and the next check without having to have someone compile all of that backup for me. And then finally, I've touched on some of the reports that are available in the system, but just to finish up on the AP routing and approval side of things, we have a series of status reports in the system. And all of the status reports, there are actually 22 different status reports. I only happen to have 5 of them loaded in my sample database here. But all of the status reports are written in Crystal, which gives us drill down capability. So if I bring in the most basic invoice status report here, basically when I generate this, what it does is it just brings up for me, this is basically your pending file. This is showing me that I've got 168 invoices pending, $184,000 worth of payables. But now if I want to, I can drill further in, and now I can see where they're located. And now I can isolate. So if I want to look and see, okay, John Jones has these 13 invoices, $53,000 worth of payables, I can drill further in, and I can see when they were assigned, the vendor, invoice. I've got all this information, and I can call up the invoice image if I want to. So the status reports will give you as much detail as you need, and you can continue to drill in to get to that detail as far as you need to go. Okay, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. I've spent the majority of our time here talking about the AP routing and approval process. The reason I do this is because primarily what happens is, many companies, this is where they want to start. This is the area that they want to be able to address first. Once you've gone through and you've kind of gotten this underway and you're starting to manage the invoice process, then what happens is that we can start to look at other documents within your organization. So basically what I want to do just to wrap up for the last 4 or 5 minutes is just talk for a moment about how the TimberScan AIM application allows you to manage documents from within any parts of your organization. So today, if you're not using a document management solution, what you're probably doing is either filing your documents manually, or you're probably using some form of the Windows file system like this, where I can go in here and set up folders and subfolders and sub-subfolders, and then I can go in and store my documents in here. And then when I need to find them, I can never go figure out what folder they're in. But what you can do in TimberScan AIM is you can go in and you can set up document types, and you can set up indexes for each document type, and then you can save those documents and you can search and retrieve them. And you can establish workflows for them. So basically, what I'll do is very quickly just show you from an administrative perspective that I'm able to go through and establish my document types, of which these are all user definable, and I can set up any document type that I want in the system. When I do that, I can also create indexes for those document types. These are all user definable as well. We have a library of document types that you can choose from. Many of these indexes are related to something over in Timberline, or I can just flexibly go in and set up my own indexes. You can also determine who has access to these document types. So you can restrict access, and you can establish workflows. So you can set up a workflow that says that whenever we execute a change order in our organization, we want that change order to automatically be routed to certain people. So in the same way that you can set up business rules for AP invoices to be routed to certain people, you can set up workflows for all of your other documents and determine how you want them to be routed. Once you go through and set up the document types, then if we go in and we're processing those documents on kind of a day-to-day basis, what we'll do is log back in. And basically what we'll go back into here, you'll see again, this is the TimberScan master menu like we saw before. But one of the things that you'll notice here is that there's also this AIM module that's available to me. So what I can do is select AIM, and based on my login criteria, it brings up a menu of items that are related to me. So for example, if I go into AIM, it shows me I have 7 tasks, which means that I have 7 documents that have been routed to me that are waiting for my review and approval. So I can just go ahead and select this. I can see the list. I've got some purchase orders and some change orders that are waiting for me. And I can go through and I can just double click on any of these. And it calls up that particular document here in the viewer, shows me how it was indexed, and I have a menu here. So I can approve this document from here. Or if I cancel it, that's the same as rejecting it. I can email it right from here to someone if I'm collaborating with someone outside the organization. The history will show me basically an audit log of everything that has taken place with that document so far. And I can see the workflows. So anyone else that has gone through and reviewed and approved this invoice, I can see the status and where does it stand right now. The other thing that I can do is from this screen, I can route to someone else right on the fly. So you can establish predefined workflows, and you can establish your own user-defined workflows right here on the fly. Other things that you're able to do, you can save documents in their native format. So what I'm able to do is I can just go through and I can save an Excel spreadsheet, a Word document, a PDF. I can call it up, open it up in its native format. I can make changes to it like I'm doing here. I can save those changes, for example, and now it's saved back into the system. And now when I open it up again, it's opened up in its native format with those changes. So you can manage any type of correspondence. You can manage Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, it doesn't matter. Once the documents are indexed into the system, then you can use the flexible search criteria to go find them if you need to. So let's say I'm in the middle of a job audit, and I need to go find all of my documents for a particular job. So I just want to be able to go out and search and find everything for job 03001. I hit search, and it goes and it finds me every document for job 03001. I can see the details of how it was coded, and I can view the document here on the screen, add notes. I can edit the document, which will call the document up on the screen and allow me to print, email it, I can see the workflows if there are any, and I can route it right from here on the fly to someone if I need to. These searches that you create, basically you can save any of them and then you can just call them up later on. So I don't have to constantly go through here and just keep building these queries. And you can use the system somewhat proactively if you want. So maybe I've got a scenario where I have certain employees that their OSHA 10-hour training certificate, they have to have it renewed every year. So what I can do is I can build a query that says, okay, go out and find me anyone whose OSHA 10-hour training certificate is going to expire sometime prior to this date. And it just goes out and searches and finds them. And then I can just call those particular documents up, and I can see who the employees are. And then if I want to, I can say, well, I've got to send an email, or I'm going to route this particular OSHA 10-hour training certificate to this Robert Jones and say, hey, you've got to get your certificate updated. It's going to expire on this date. So these searches can be very flexible. You can build as many conditions as you want. But the other thing, and this is the final thing that we'll talk about, and then we're going to open it up for any questions, is you can link these documents to various places over in Sage 300. So basically, what I can do is I can link documents, let's say, to the job file, and then if I save those documents in AIM, I can come over here into job cost, and I could just go into a job, for example, call up, let's say, job 03001, and when I click on the attachments button, the documents are all right here. So anything that I've linked to the job file, I can just call it up and I can open up that drawing over here. So it gives you that flexibility where I can use the flexible searches in AIM, but I can also be inside Timberline and I can just call up the document over here. Okay, we've stretched a little bit past the hour. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the fact that you were able to hang in here